Welcome back, everyone. The Florida man strikes again. This time he's out with a new piece of legislation, the Stop Woke Act. Yes, exactly what it sounds like.
By us protecting against CRT and this Stop Woke Act, we're going to be making sure that that time in school is actually spent learning and not just being targets of indoctrination. And that is going to be a very good thing for parents throughout the state of Florida.
The Stop Wrongs Against Our Kids and Employees Act takes aim at critical race theory, which Governor DeSantis banned in June, and which Florida school districts say, no worries here, they weren't teaching it anyways. The proposed legislation would give parents a private right of action to sue if they believe their kids are being taught critical race theory, and allow parents to collect attorney's fees if they win their lawsuits. The act would also protect employees against a hostile work environment due to critical race theory. Republicans have made CRT an academic theory to examine power, their latest villain to stoke white anxieties and stifle understandings of Black history. But that didn't stop DeSantis from citing a Black civil rights leader to justify the move.
You think about what MLK stood for. He said he didn't want people judged on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. You listen to some of these people nowadays, they don't talk about that.
Back with us to discuss this is Michael Harriet, opinion columnist at The Guardian. Thanks for sticking with us, Michael. Okay, what do you think of this Stop Woke Act? Governor DeSantis already banned critical race theory, even though it wasn't even being taught in Florida schools. What do you make of this?
Yeah, so, one of the things I disagree with is that, we should be worried about whether history is going to be taught correctly in school. I don't think it's been taught correctly in school to begin with, but I don't know if this will necessarily make it worse, because what they're doing is not targeting history in school. They're virtue signaling and dog whistling to white people about this concern that doesn't exist, right? So I don't know what the effects will be, but what he's effectively done is put a bounty on teachers' heads who want to talk about race in class. And it's a bad thing generally, and specifically, they co-opted the word woke, but it really doesn't mean anything, because this is what they've always done. They turned the phrase Black Power into something that was anti-white. They turned Black Lives Matter into something that was anti-white. So this is what they've done throughout history to kind of flip the perspective on anything that Black people do and to make it something that is anti-American or Marxism or anti-white or anti-cop, and you name it, they'll do it.
Yeah, it's such a shame that people want to interpret it as if you're pro-Black, that means you're anti-white. That's certainly not the case. But, the really special part of all of this is that Governor DeSantis cited Martin Luther King Jr. to justify the need for the proposal. So what do you think the late civil rights leader would have thought of the way Ron DeSantis used his words today?
Well, first of all, we know we don't have to speculate. First of all, Martin Luther King didn't say we don't want people judged by the color of their skin. He said he didn't want his children, the Black children, because he knew white people weren't being judged by the color of their skin, right? So he was specifically talking about Black people, and he did that throughout the speech, the I Have a Dream speech, when he spoke at the March on Washington. And the thing about Martin Luther King is he specifically spoke to white liberals. He specifically spoke to white pastors and white churches. He talked about white people all the time. And he said specifically that power never gives up its power, without a fight. And so when Ron DeSantis and others cite Martin Luther King, what they're doing is, those are the people who would have turned a water hose on Martin Luther King, or put another bullet in Martin Luther King's head, or would have.
There are cynics who would rather see us divided on racial, ethnic, gender, and religious lines because it suits their political agenda. But I believe as Americans, We should stand united against all forms of bigotry.
While many were focused on the vote to hold former President Donald Trump's former chief of staff in contempt of Congress last night, the House also passed legislation aimed at fighting Islamophobia, sponsored by Representative Ilhan Omar. The chamber voted 219 to 212 to establish a special envoy within the State Department to monitor and combat Islamophobia around the world. The legislation comes after progressives pushed to have Representative Lauren Boebert stripped of her committee assignments for her racist and Islamophobic attacks on Omar. But even the debate on the House floor yesterday was not without bigotry from Republicans.
American taxpayers shouldn't be forced to pay terrorist organizations that the maker of this bill is affiliated with.
The House Rules Enforcer quickly struck Representative Perry's remarks from the record for making baseless claims and barred him from speaking for the remainder of the debate. For some insight now, I'd like to welcome Dalia Fahmy, Professor of Political Science at Long Island University. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor. What do you make of Representative Scott Perry's remarks on the House floor?
You know, we continue to treat these statements as if they're one-offs, as if they're from the margins. We saw Representative Boebert say that Ilhan Omar, a fellow colleague, was a terrorist or a suicide bomber. And we saw Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene repeatedly call her a member of the Jihad Squad. And we continue to use these as examples of people on the margins, but they're coming from within the political establishment. I want to highlight some findings that we've seen in the past few years, where Republicans are making these kinds of statements as elected officials in 49 of the 50 U.S. states. We've seen statements like Muslims constituents need to answer a questionnaire if they beat their wives, or if they want to enter the United States, they should eat pork first. This was a Nebraska state senator. What we're seeing is that the actual Republican platform, it's an acceptable plank, and Ilhan Omar has become the kind of easy whipping boy, if you will, for this. Now, her bill is actually not about Islamophobia within the United States. It's looking to combat Islamophobia throughout the world, much like the Office to Combat Anti-Semitism that exists in the State Department does. And the reason why is we're seeing the rhetoric that is here in the United States echoed throughout many corners of the world, but they're also leading to violence. For example, the genocide of the Uyghurs in China, or the Rohingya in Burma, or India targeting Muslims. They're the targeting of mobs by Muslims by elements of the Modi government. We see this in Europe, in the UK, in Belgium, in France. And so what this bill is for is to actually create a position within the State Department similar to the anti-Semitism position. Question is, will it actually pass the Senate?
That's the big question there. Now, progressives wanted Lauren Boebert to face consequences. Do you think this bill is enough to set an example of what the House will tolerate?
No, I think Representative Boebert, just like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, just like elected officials, again, in 49 of the 50 U.S. states that have continued to make Islamophobic comments, have not been held accountable. Even today's the kind of slapping on the wrist of calling for the silencing of Scott Perry, it is not enough, because we know that the flaming of anti-Muslim sentiment, just like anti-Black sentiment and anti-Semitic sentiment from within the political establishment, has a direct result that leads to violence against these very minority groups in the public. So the social cultural effects of these statements run very deep. For example, in the United States, we know that 1 in 3 Muslim students, children, is the victim of bullying, or that 67% of Muslims in the United States say that they have experienced incidents of racism, and 34% say that they've actually experienced incidents of violent racism. Now, this is unprecedented in U.S. history. According to the FBI, there has been a 17% increase every year for the past 5 years. And so these statements, even this bill, is nothing and nowhere near enough to curtail the violence that these elected officials had brought on to communities within the United States that have been echoed throughout the world. We now have manifestos, for example, from Christchurch, that the white power and the race wars rhetoric is moving transcontinentally. And so what this means is that this language, fueled from the past 5 years within the Republican Party, is taking root in Europe and throughout the world.
So does that mean you don't think this bill will achieve much?
The passing of this bill, and actually if it does create an office within the State Department, hopefully will allow for the State Department to hold our allies across the world accountable. Our biggest trading partners, India and China, those throughout Europe. However, it's not going to be able to be enforced until we clean house here in the United States, until this language is no longer acceptable. And it seems that Islamophobic rhetoric is fundamentally acceptable and has become a pillar of the Republican platform. So while symbolically this is important throughout the world, until we take care of our own house here in the United States, it's not clear that we can hold other countries accountable.
Yeah, it seems almost like it's encouraged. Actually, something that we really want to look at in the States, like you said, and around the world, cleaning up here first is so important. But thank you so much, Professor. We appreciate you joining us for this important discussion. And your Black History Moment is next.